The wind slid through the towers of Elmsworth like a whisper no one listened to, cold, constant, and unseen. Below, the city pulsed with life, neon lights blinking through the mist, footsteps echoing on wet pavement, a million lives tangled in motion. But high above it all, in a penthouse overlooking the dark sprawl of Rosemere Park, time had frozen. Nathaniel Hart sat alone, his back to the glass, the world at his feet. He held a glass of whiskey, not out of thirst, but habit. Like the suits he wore, or the walls he built inside himself, power clung to him like a second skin. He'd built an empire from concrete and calculation. He had everything the world applauded: wealth, reputation, control. But in his eyes there was only distance. As if even his own life was just another deal, closed long ago. Across the room, Clara stood by the fireplace. Her fingers toyed with the hem of her dress, trying to ground herself in its delicate seams. She had practiced this moment, whispered it to the night, to the mirror, to the silence. But now, facing the man she once believed in, her voice felt like glass, fragile, and one breath from shattering. "I need to tell you something," she said, almost to the flames. Nathaniel didn't turn. The ice in his glass clinked softly. "Go ahead." "I'm pregnant." For a moment, the only sound was the soft hum of the city far below. Then he set the glass down, turned to her. His eyes didn't soften. They narrowed, calculating. "Pregnant," he repeated, as if testing the word. "How convenient." Her heart faltered. "Nathaniel, what are you saying?" "I'm saying," he replied, stepping toward her, "that you think I'm a fool." Her breath caught. "We've been married 3 years. My mother warned me about women like you," he said quietly, almost conversationally. "She said you'd find a way to secure your place, and here you are, holding a child like a contract." Clara felt the sting before the tears came. "This isn't a scheme. This is a life. Our life." He laughed, just once, cold, hollow. "You really believe I'd fall for that? You think this baby gives you a claim to me? To my fortune?" She shook her head, voice trembling. "I never wanted your money." "No," he said. "You wanted me, and now you've made sure I can't walk away without guilt." He moved closer, towering. "I don't trust you, Clara, and I won't be manipulated." Her arms folded over her belly instinctively, a quiet, desperate shield. "This is our child." His answer was a check, ripped from his book, signed without looking. "Take it," he said. "You won't have to worry about a thing, but you will leave." She looked down at the slip of paper in her hand. She could still smell the ink, still feel the cold behind his words. "You think this is what I came for?" Her voice cracked. "That I'd trade my child for your convenience?" He didn't blink. "Take the money or take nothing, but you won't stay." The silence between them stretched, sharp and final. Not loud, not dramatic, just the quiet of something ending. She stared at the man she once believed she could build a future with. But that man no longer stood before her. If he ever had. She didn't cry in front of him. Leora turned quietly, retreating into the bedroom they once called theirs. Her face remained composed until the door clicked shut behind her. Then the tears came, silent and aching, falling faster than her hands could wipe them away. This wasn't just a room. It had been the beginning of 1,000 small dreams. Books half read beside the bed, lazy Sunday mornings, whispered hopes at midnight. Now she was packing a bag with trembling hands, trying to decide which pieces of her life were small enough to carry. When she stepped out into the hallway, Nathaniel was already standing by the front door, arms folded like a gatekeeper. "Don't come back," he said, voice sharp and final. She looked at him one last time, hoping, praying for even a flicker of doubt in his eyes. But there was nothing. So she left. The cold slapped her face the moment she stepped outside. Winter in Elmsworth had a cruel edge, and tonight it showed no mercy. She pulled her coat tighter, though it did little to stop the chill burrowing into her bones. She had nowhere to go. No family nearby, no friends in the city. The streets were loud, honking cars, flashing lights, strangers rushing past like she didn't exist. She wrapped her arms around her stomach, whispering into the night, "I'll take care of you, no matter what, you won't suffer for this." But as the hours passed, reality sharpened. No home, no money, no safety net. And yet somewhere beneath the fear, a quiet ember remained. She would not break, she would survive. For the child she carried, she would fight. Near midnight, Leora found herself at Grand Central Terminal. The crowds had thinned, the echo of footsteps ringing off marble walls. She sat on a wooden bench tucked away in a dim corner, her legs throbbing from hours of wandering. Around her, people passed with purpose, boarding trains, making plans, moving forward. She was frozen in place. She closed her eyes, just for a moment. Sleep didn't come. Her stomach growled, reminding her she hadn't eaten since morning. But hunger wasn't the worst of it. It was the weight of having no one to call, no door to knock on, no face that would light up at the sight of her. By morning, she knew she had to leave Elmsworth. This city was built on glass towers and memories too sharp to touch. She thought of Rachel, a friend from university, someone kind, steady. They'd lost touch, but Rachel lived in Chicago, and right now, that was enough. At the Port Haven bus terminal, Leora stood in line behind strangers wrapped in coats and heavy luggage. When it was her turn, she stepped up to the counter. "I need a ticket to Chicago," she said softly. "One way or round trip?" the clerk asked without looking up. The question stung. A round trip meant she had something to return to. A life. A home. "One way," she whispered. "That's $120. The number hit her like a slap. She stepped aside, heart racing. Her fingers curled around the empty pockets of her coat. She had never begged before, never thought she'd have to. But what choice did she have now? She glanced around, eyes scanning for a softness in the crowd, someone who might see her not as a problem, but as a person. She saw a woman standing alone near the vending machines, middle-aged, well-dressed, a gentle expression. Leora inhaled deeply. Her voice shook. "Excuse me? I'm sorry to bother you." "I'm in a really difficult place," Leora said, her voice barely rising above the station's background noise. "I need to get to Chicago. I don't have the money for a bus ticket. If you could spare anything, anything at all." The woman she'd approached shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. "I'm sorry," she mumbled, stepping away quickly. "I can't help." Leora stood frozen for a moment, shame rising in her throat like smoke. She tried again. An elderly man in a wool coat, a businessman checking his watch, a young couple holding hands. Each time the reaction was the same. Polite refusal, forced smiles, or worse, eyes that refused to see her at all. Her cheeks burned, her hands were shaking. She felt invisible and exposed all at once. She was just about to give up when she felt a gentle tap on her shoulder. She turned. A tall, lanky man stood behind her, his face kind, his clothes worn, his eyes carrying stories that only hardship could write. "Chicago, huh?" he said with a small smile. "That's home. Grew up on the South Side." She nodded, embarrassed. "It's $120. The man didn't flinch. He reached into his coat, pulled out a thin wallet, and counted out the exact amount. He handed it to her without hesitation. "I've been where you are," he said simply. "Just promise me something. When you can, pay it forward." Tears welled in Leora's eyes. "I will. I promise. You have no idea what this means to me." An hour later, she sat by the window of a Greyhound bus, watching Elmsworth fade behind her in flickers of light and concrete. She didn't know what waited for her at the other end. She didn't know if Rachel would open her door. But for the first time since Nathaniel had cast her out, hope stirred in her chest, not as a roar, but a whisper. Morning arrived with a chill as the bus rolled into Chicago. The city was alive but not loud, less polished than Elmsworth, but somehow warmer, more human. It reminded her of a life before love became conditional. She had Rachel's address, pulled from an old holiday card. No phone, no warning, just a name and a memory of kindness. She used the last of her money on a cab, heart hammering against her ribs as the car moved through Lincoln Park's quiet streets. When the driver stopped in front of a modest apartment building, Leora hesitated. What if she's not there? What if she's forgotten me? Still, she forced herself to knock. Seconds dragged. Then the door opened. Rachel stood there. The years showed in her face, but so did something deeper. Recognition, concern, warmth. "Leora?" she gasped. Tears broke free from Leora's lashes. I didn't know where else to go." Rachel's eyes swept over her, exhaustion in her features, the way she protectively cradled her stomach. She didn't hesitate. She pulled Leora into a hug. "Come in." The warmth hit her like a tide. The scent of coffee, the quiet hum of a radio, books lined every shelf, photos of laughter frozen in time. Rachel led her to the couch, tucked a soft blanket around her shoulders, and sat beside her. "Tell me everything." Leora took a breath that shook her to the core. And she told her. About Nathaniel. About the baby. About the night she was left with nothing but a bag and a name. Rachel said nothing for a long while. When she finally spoke, her voice was tight with fury. "That bastard," she muttered. "You deserved better than him the day you met him." Leora wiped her cheeks. "I don't know what to do. I have no job, no home. I can't raise a baby like this." Rachel reached for her hand and squeezed it. "You're not alone. Not anymore. Stay here. As long as you need. We'll figure it out together." For the first time in days, Leora felt something give way in her chest. Not despair, but relief. She wasn't alone, and maybe, just maybe, she'd been given a chance to begin again. The sound of distant traffic filtered through the apartment windows, a hum that became strangely soothing over time. But more comforting than the city's rhythm was Rachel, the woman who had opened her door without hesitation, and, in doing so, had become more than an old friend. She was family now. And yet, no matter how warm the blankets or kind the gestures, Leora knew she couldn't stay sheltered forever. She needed to find her own footing. Not just for herself, but for the child growing quietly inside her. She needed to build something real. The job hunt was grueling. Without a college degree or any savings, her options were limited. Day after day, she walked through downtown Chicago, filling out applications in cafes, small shops, anywhere with a help wanted sign taped to the window. The rejections were steady. Some were polite. "We're looking for someone with experience." Others barely offered eye contact. But she kept going, because giving up wasn't an option. One gray afternoon, after hours on her feet, Leora stumbled upon a small diner in River North. The scent of grilled onions and warm pie drifted through the doorway. A faded sign on the window read, "Help Wanted." With a flicker of hope, she stepped inside. At the counter, a woman in her 50s was drying a mug, her eyes sharp behind smudged reading glasses. She looked up. "What can I get you?" "I saw the sign," Leora said quietly. "Are you still hiring?" The woman studied her for a long moment. "Ever worked in food service?" Leora shook her head. "No, but I learned quickly. I really need this job." The woman sighed, setting the mug aside. "It's long hours, crappy pay, and some customers bite harder than the burgers. Think you can handle that?" Leora nodded without hesitation. "I'll do whatever it takes." The woman introduced herself as Margaret, the diner's owner. With a skeptical glance, she handed over a worn apron. "Morning shift. Tomorrow. Don't be late." Leora could barely hold back tears. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't secure, but it was something, a place to begin. That evening, she shared the news with Rachel over dinner. Rachel beamed and pulled her into a hug. "See? You're already building something." The next morning, Leora arrived at the diner before sunrise. It was a modest place, filled with the scent of burnt coffee and familiarity. Truck drivers, city workers, lonely old men reading the paper, all of them regulars, all of them pieces of the city she was learning to belong to. The work was exhausting, taking orders, scrubbing tables, smiling through rudeness. But beneath the ache in her feet, there was something else. Purpose. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't just surviving. She was fighting for something better. She saved every dollar she could. No luxuries, no takeout. She ate whatever Rachel made, walked instead of taking the bus, cut corners wherever possible. But she also knew a minimum wage paycheck wouldn't cover what was coming. Doctor's visits, diapers, clothes, the unending cost of raising a child. One evening, after a long shift, she sat across from Rachel at their tiny kitchen table. "I need to do more," Leora admitted. "The diner's not enough." Rachel, still grading papers from her high school classroom, looked up thoughtfully. "Have you considered night classes?" Leora gave a soft, tired laugh. "I don't have the time, or the money." Rachel tapped her pen on the table. "There are community programs. Some are made for women like you, single mothers. They offer training, scholarships, real support. Let me help you look." The next day, Leora visited the Chicago Women's Resource Center. It was quiet, warm. A counselor named Linda greeted her with gentle eyes and a notepad. Leora told her everything. Linda listened without judgment, then handed her a brochure and a list of programs. "You're not alone," she said. "There are people who want to help. You just have to let them." One course in particular caught Leora's eye: medical office assistant training. It was short, practical, affordable, and it led to stable work. Something shifted inside her. Maybe this wasn't the end of the road, maybe it was the very beginning. Leora signed up for the training course that same afternoon, her heart set on one thing: giving her child the kind of future that didn't start in fear. As the weeks passed, so did the seasons. Her belly grew steadily beneath oversized sweaters, but so did her determination. She balanced her shifts at the diner, late-night classes, and prenatal appointments with quiet grit. Exhaustion became her constant companion, but she carried it like armor, because every step forward was for her child. At the diner, Margaret took notice. She didn't say much, but she started treating Leora with something close to respect, leaving extra slices of pie in a to-go box, slipping sandwiches into her bag when no one was watching. And Rachel? Rachel remained her lighthouse. Every late-night study session, every long shift, every moment of doubt, Rachel was there, steady and unshakable. One quiet evening, Leora sat on the edge of her bed, folding tiny onesies Rachel had found at a second-hand shop. Her fingers trembled over the soft cotton. It still felt surreal, this new life waiting to arrive. Then she felt it, a flutter. She froze, placed a hand over the small curve of her stomach. Another flutter, stronger, clearer. A kick. A soft gasp escaped her lips. Her eyes filled. "You're really in there," she whispered, her voice thick with awe. "You're really coming." It was the first time she felt it. Not just the responsibility, not just the weight, but the love. Deep, fierce, unshakable. A love that softened all the bitterness Nathaniel had left behind. Meanwhile, in New York City, Nathaniel Hart lived as if none of it had ever happened. His name was printed in glossy finance magazines, his empire sprawling across real estate, investment, and luxury. Women came and went, none of them lasting long enough to matter. He told himself he'd made the right decision, that Leora had been a misstep, that whatever had been growing inside her wasn't his concern. He never once thought about the child he had left behind. But fate rarely forgets. And 20 years later, the woman he'd discarded would return, not broken, but radiant, not lost, but whole, and far stronger than he could have imagined. Back in Chicago, Leora's life unfolded in quiet victories. The months turned into years. And from the moment her son was born, on a snowy morning at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, everything changed. She named him Daniel. The moment his tiny fingers wrapped around hers, Leora made a silent vow. "You will never feel abandoned. Not the way I was." The early years were brutal. She worked long shifts at the diner, then late nights studying medical codes and front desk procedures. When she couldn't be home, Rachel became Daniel's second mother, rocking him to sleep, reading bedtime stories, whispering lullabies. There were nights Leora came home bone-tired, her body aching. But one sleepy smile from Daniel made it all worth it. When he turned 5, Leora finally left the diner behind. She'd completed her training and landed a full-time job at a pediatric clinic in Lincoln Park. The salary wasn't high, but it was stable. She moved them into a tiny 2-bedroom apartment, modest but warm, safe. She gave Daniel everything she could. Second-hand books, warm coats, Sunday trips to the library, small treats when paychecks allowed. He never felt the absence of wealth, only the abundance of love. In the beginning, she still thought about Nathaniel. There were moments of anger. Nights she wondered if he ever regretted what he'd done. But in time, she realized, dwelling on him didn't rebuild her life. Loving Daniel did. Nathaniel had chosen to forget them. She had chosen to begin again. Daniel grew into a bright, kind-hearted boy with Leora's dark hair and fierce determination. But his eyes, sharp ice blue, were unmistakably his father's. Leora never lied to him. When he asked, she told him the truth. That his father had, Leora never spoke his name with anger. When Daniel was old enough to ask, she told him the truth, simply and without bitterness. "He left before you were born," she said. He was a powerful man, living a life built on ambition. But some people make choices they can't undo, and those choices, they don't define who you are. Daniel had never asked much more, because for him, his mother was the world. Her strength, her laughter through exhaustion, the way she never let the weight of life take away her warmth. She was everything he needed. By the time Daniel turned 18, he had grown into the kind of young man Leora had once only dared to imagine. Sharp-minded, deeply kind, and quietly determined. When the acceptance letter from Columbia University arrived, Leora cried. Not because she was sad, but because every sleepless night, every dollar saved, every lonely decision had led to this. The morning she dropped him off in New York, she held him close at the edge of the campus crowd. "Go make your mark on the world, my love," she whispered into his ear. "I will," he promised. And then he was gone. folded into the sea of fresh starts and unknown futures. Leora stood for a long moment after, tears in her eyes. Not from grief, but from the overwhelming beauty of what they had built. Across the city, Nathaniel Hart's life looked vastly different. He had reached heights most men only dream of. Towering glass buildings bore his name. Magazine covers, awards, power that pulsed through every handshake. But the cost? 2 failed marriages, children he barely spoke to, a mansion that echoed with nothing but silence. He told himself he had moved on, that the girl from long ago was a closed chapter in a closed book. But fate is rarely so easily dismissed. One late afternoon, Daniel found himself wandering the streets of Manhattan, taking in the city that was slowly becoming his own. That's when he saw it. A skyscraper so tall it seemed to slice the clouds, its name carved in bold silver letters, Hart Enterprises. The name tugged at something inside him, a memory, a story half told. He pulled out his phone. The search began with hesitation, but soon, screen after screen filled with headlines and photos. Nathaniel Hart, his biological father. The man who had left without looking back. Daniel scrolled through stories of success and scandals. A man worshipped for his wealth but quietly condemned for his absence in the lives that should have mattered. For the first time, Daniel felt it. Not hatred. Not grief. Just a quiet ache. A desire to understand. That night, Daniel called home. "Mom," he said, voice careful, "do you ever wonder if he regrets it?" There was a pause. Leora knew exactly who he meant. She took a breath. "Maybe," she said softly, "but I stopped wondering a long time ago." Daniel didn't answer right away. His mother had made peace with the silence. But he hadn't, not yet. In the weeks that followed, he dug deeper into articles, public records, business exposés. Each piece painted the same man, ruthless in the boardroom, distant in the living room. Nathaniel Hart had built a kingdom, but he seemed to rule it alone. Then one afternoon, while walking near Wall Street, Daniel stopped in front of the glass tower once more. This time, he didn't just stand there, he stepped inside. The lobby was sleek and silent, the kind of place where money whispered louder than voices. Behind the marble reception desk sat a woman in her 40s, her blazer crisp, her smile professional. She looked up. "Do you have an appointment?" Daniel's heart thudded against his ribs. He straightened his back, took a breath, and said, "No." Daniel admitted quietly, "I don't have an appointment." The receptionist raised an eyebrow. "Then what's this regarding?" He hesitated, but only for a breath. "I need to see Mr. Hart," he said, voice steady. "It's important." Her polite smile didn't fade, but a new edge entered her tone. "And who may I say is asking?" Daniel stood taller, even as his heart pounded in his chest. "I'm his son." Silence. The woman, sleek, composed, and practiced, stared at him as if he'd just spoken in a foreign language. For a long moment, her expression didn't shift, but her eyes did. Behind the surface professionalism, something flickered. Surprise and curiosity. She studied him. His face, his stance, as if trying to place a ghost she didn't know she'd been warned about. Daniel held her gaze, though his throat had gone dry. He hadn't planned this, hadn't thought beyond walking in. But now that the words had been spoken aloud, now that they echoed in this glossy marble lobby, it all felt terrifyingly real. He was Nathaniel Hart's son, the son of the man who had walked away before he was even born. The man who had built this tower of steel and glass and left his past buried beneath it. And yet, here he was, knocking. "Do you have any identification?" she asked finally, her voice more guarded now. Daniel pulled out his license. She glanced at the name Carter and blinked once. It told her nothing. Of course it wouldn't. He carried his mother's name. "Wait here," she said curtly, then disappeared behind a sleek glass door. Daniel stood alone, surrounded by silence and the subtle hum of wealth. Polished stone floors, towering ceilings, curated artwork too expensive to touch. Everything here whispered control. This was his father's world, a world that had made no room for him. Minutes stretched into forever. Just as doubt began to creep in, the door opened again, but it wasn't the receptionist who returned. A tall man in a dark suit, security, approached with a face carved from stone. "Mr. Hart will see you," he said simply. "Follow me." Daniel's pulse raced. He followed the man through a labyrinth of glass and marble, each step echoing with the weight of what he was about to do. Finally, they stopped at a set of massive oak doors. The guard pushed one open. The office was vast, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Manhattan's skyline, modern, immaculate, untouchable. Behind a jet-black desk sat the man himself, Nathaniel Hart, older than the photos Daniel had seen, with silver threads in his hair and lines around his mouth that no camera could soften. But the power he radiated hadn't dimmed. It was in the way he sat, in the way his sharp blue eyes lifted from his laptop and narrowed slightly as they landed on Daniel. He didn't speak, just studied him, carefully, quietly. Daniel felt the full weight of that gaze, the same eyes he saw in his own reflection every morning. Then, in a voice honed for boardrooms and closed-door deals, Nathaniel finally said, "Who are you?" Daniel's stomach turned, but he didn't look away. "My name is Daniel," he said evenly. "Daniel Carter." The name floated in the air, and then he added, calmly but unshakably, "Your son." There was no reaction at first, only a subtle tightening of the jaw. Nathaniel's fingers, resting on the laptop keyboard, curled slightly, but his face remained unreadable. "I don't have a son," he said, his tone flat as stone. Daniel let out a quiet, bitter laugh. "Yeah," he said, "I figured you'd say that." He took a step forward. "I'm not here to ask for anything. I just want you to hear the truth you walked away from. You left my mother when she was pregnant. You knew, and you chose power over people. Over us. You threw her out," Daniel said, his voice low but trembling with fire. "You treated her like she was disposable. She raised me on her own. She worked herself into the ground so I could have a life, while you sat here in your empire, pretending we didn't exist." Nathaniel exhaled slowly. The words seemed to land harder than he'd expected. He stood and circled the desk, his steps measured, careful. Up close, Daniel could see it. Just for a moment, something flickering in his father's eyes. Was it regret? Recognition? Or just the surprise of being found? "Leora Carter," Nathaniel murmured, almost to himself. That was her name. When his gaze returned to Daniel, it was no longer blank. There was something new behind it, something raw. "She never tried to contact me." Daniel's jaw clenched. "Why would she?" he snapped. "You made it clear she wasn't welcome. She left with nothing, but she left with dignity. She didn't come crawling back. Because she never needed you." Nathaniel looked away, his hand dragging across his face like the weight of time had finally caught up to him. For the first time, he looked tired. Not from work, from truth. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. Daniel's heart pounded. "Because it ruins the image?" he shot back. "Because I don't fit the story you've told yourself all these years?" He shook his head, hurt sharpening his voice. "I didn't come here for money. I don't want anything from you. I just needed to look you in the eye and ask one question. How does a man walk away from his own child and never once look back?" Silence settled over the room like dust. When Nathaniel finally spoke, his voice was rough. "You think it was easy?" He turned to the window, his reflection ghosting in the glass. "I was young, hungry, ambitious. I wasn't ready to be a father." He looked back, his eyes harder now. "And if I had tried, if I'd reached out, do you think she would have let me in?" Daniel hesitated. He didn't know. Leora had never spoken about wanting Nathaniel back in their lives. But that didn't make the question fair, or right. "You didn't try," Daniel said quietly. "That's the difference." Nathaniel studied him, and something, just something, cracked. "You're right," he said. "I didn't." Daniel took a deep breath. He had come seeking answers, and maybe he got them. Just not the ones he wanted. His father wasn't a monster. He was worse. He was a man who had chosen the silence, and then lived with it. "I don't know what I expected," Daniel said, shaking his head. "I guess I just needed to see it for myself." He turned toward the door, but just as his hand touched the handle, Nathaniel spoke. "Daniel." He didn't turn around. A beat passed, then another. "What does your mother think about you being here?" Daniel's hand tightened on the knob. Slowly, he turned just enough to meet Nathaniel's eyes. "She doesn't know," he said, "but I think she stopped thinking about you a long time ago." And with that, he walked away, leaving Nathaniel Hart standing alone in the heart of his empire, staring at the son he never knew and would never truly have. Outside, the autumn air of Manhattan wrapped around Daniel like a second skin. The sky was sharp with wind, the city alive with movement, but inside him, everything was still. He had come hoping for answers. What he found was silence, and somehow, that said everything. Daniel had spent years imagining this moment, rehearsing it in his mind like a scene in a film. the confrontation, the questions, the reckoning. But reality had been quieter, colder. There had been no slammed fists, no raised voices. His father hadn't begged for forgiveness, hadn't even offered an excuse. There were no tears, no redemption, just indifference. And somehow that stung more than rejection ever could. Because rejection meant you were seen. Indifference meant you were nothing. Daniel wandered through the city without aim, the blur of honking taxis and passing strangers washing over him like static. His phone buzzed again in his pocket. He didn't check it. He knew who it was. His mother. She had no idea he was here. He hadn't told her. He wasn't ready, not for the questions, not for the sigh in her voice, not for the quiet, "I told you so." He just needed space. Time to feel everything he didn't expect to feel. Eventually, he found himself in Central Park, on a bench facing the lake. The trees had begun to turn, shedding leaves like whispered reminders that even the strongest things must let go. He watched joggers pass, couples walk by, children laugh in the distance, and then he thought of her, his mother. How many parks had she taken him to? How many scraped knees had she kissed? How many times had she come home exhausted from double shifts but still made time to help with homework? She had been everything. And the man who had given him life? He had given nothing. Daniel finally took out his phone. Missed calls, messages. One caught his eye. "Call me. It's important." His chest tightened. He hesitated, then dialed. She picked up on the first ring. "Daniel," she breathed, relief flooding through her voice. "Where have you been? I've been trying to reach you all day." "Sorry, Mom," he said softly, rubbing his temple. "I just needed to clear my head." There was a pause. "Where are you?" "In the city," he admitted. Silence again, and then without accusation, just quiet knowing, she asked, "You went to see him, didn't you?" Daniel exhaled. "Yeah." The pause that followed was long, heavy. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Softer, sadder. "I thought you might, eventually." "You're not mad?" She gave a small laugh, but there was no joy in it. "Mad? No. Just," she sighed. "I guess I always knew this day would come. I just hoped maybe you wouldn't need to go looking for answers that would never satisfy you." Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I don't know what I expected, but he didn't care, Mom. He didn't even pretend to." His voice cracked. He just accepted it. Like leaving us was just another business decision. There was quiet again. Then she said what Daniel hadn't been ready to hear, but needed more than anything. "That's who he is, sweetheart. That's who he's always been." Daniel swallowed hard. "Did you ever try to reach out to him?" She didn't answer right away, and when she did, her voice was stripped of everything but truth. "No, I was young, hurt, and too proud to beg someone to love their own child." A pause. "And honestly, I didn't want him in your life if he didn't want to be there. You deserved better than that." Daniel's throat tightened. "You never told me much about him," he said. "I didn't want you to grow up with hate in your heart," she replied. "He made his choice," Leora said quietly, her voice steady despite the emotion underneath. "And I made mine." Daniel pressed the phone tighter to his ear. "My choice," she continued, "was to make sure you never felt unwanted, not for a single second." He swallowed hard, his chest tight with emotion. "You did, Mom. You were enough." There was a pause on the line, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick with tears. "That's all I ever wanted to hear." For the first time that day, Daniel felt something click into place. Not a dramatic revelation, just clarity. Maybe he hadn't needed to meet Nathaniel Hart to find closure. Maybe the real answer had been beside him all along. In the voice that tucked him in at night, in the hands that held his through every heartbreak, in the heart that had given him everything, even when she had nothing. He stood from the bench, looking out over the lake one last time. "I'm coming home," he whispered. His mother exhaled softly on the other end of the line. "I'll be here." He ended the call, took a deep breath, and began walking toward the subway. He had spent so many years chasing something. Justice, acknowledgement, maybe even revenge. But none of it mattered anymore. He didn't need Nathaniel Hart. He never had. And now, finally, he was ready to live like he believed it. That night, Daniel sat alone in his small apartment in Brooklyn, the city lights flickering outside his window like distant memories. The meeting with his father had left a hollow space inside him, a strange void he couldn't quite name. He had expected anger, or guilt, or something, anything. Instead, he'd been met with cold detachment, as if his entire existence was nothing more than a forgotten footnote in someone else's story. And somehow that was worse, but oddly freeing. All those years, he had wondered if he'd done something wrong. If maybe he hadn't been lovable enough, strong enough, worthy enough. But now he knew. His father's absence had never been about him. It had always been about the man's own fears, his selfishness. And with that truth, Daniel could finally stop blaming himself. He picked up his phone again, scrolling until he found her name. Mom. They had already spoken earlier, but something inside him needed to hear her voice again. Just for a moment, he called. She answered almost instantly. Daniel, she said, warmth blooming in her tone. Just that one word, and he already felt better. Hey, Mom, he said, his voice softer than he meant it to be. Just wanted to check in, she chuckled lightly. Sweetheart, you don't have to check in on me. I'm the mom, remember? I'm the one who checks in on you. A small smile played at his lips. Yeah. Well, I just wanted to hear your voice. There was a pause. Then, gently, are you okay? Daniel leaned back against the couch, running a hand through his hair. I don't know. I thought meeting him would give me closure. But instead, it just feels empty. She sighed on the other end. That's because closure doesn't come from other people, Daniel. It comes from within. Her voice was calm, steady. The voice that had steadied his storms since childhood. He was never going to give you anything you didn't already have. Daniel closed his eyes, letting her words settle into the quiet spaces inside him. You were right, he said, about him, about everything. There was silence. Then her voice, softer now. I never wanted to be right about this, sweetheart. I would have given anything for him to be the father you deserved. His throat tightened. You were enough, Mom. You always were. A soft sniffle came through the line. Thank you, baby, she whispered. That means more than you'll ever know. They talked for a while longer, reminiscing, laughing, letting memory do what it does best, wrap old wounds in the comfort of shared joy. And as Daniel listened to her laugh, a sound he'd grown up with, he realized something. He hadn't found the missing piece. He had finally seen that it had never been missing at all. By the time Daniel ended the call with his mother that night, something inside him felt lighter. No, he hadn't found the dramatic closure he once thought he needed. But he had found something more valuable. The truth that he had never truly been alone. The woman who had raised him with grace and grit had been his home all along. In the days that followed, Daniel poured himself into work. He wasn't climbing the towers his father had built. He didn't sit in glass-walled boardrooms or shake hands with billionaires. He was a financial analyst at a modest firm, humble in scale but steady, honest. And he was proud, because every inch of his life he had carved with his own hands. No shortcuts, no inheritance, no name to open doors, just work, persistence, quiet strength, the kind his mother had taught him. One afternoon, while picking up coffee near Wall Street, he ran into a familiar face. Michael, an old friend from college. They hadn't spoken in years, but after the initial surprise, conversation flowed easily. Catching up turned into a shared table. Coffee turned into an idea. Michael was working at a new investment startup. They needed someone sharp, grounded, someone like Daniel. At first, Daniel hesitated. He had stability now, a routine. But the idea of building something from scratch, of proving to himself that he could create, not just survive, sparked something inside him. After a few sleepless nights, he leapt. He quit his job and joined the startup. The months that followed were intense, long hours, late nights, no guarantees. But they were his. And slowly, the venture began to grow. Investors came. Clients followed. The team expanded, and Daniel, without fanfare or legacy, began to make a name for himself. Not as the estranged son of Nathaniel Hart, just as Daniel, the man who had shown up, stayed late, took risks, built something from the ground up. For the first time, he felt the difference. He wasn't outrunning his past anymore. He was outgrowing it. Then one evening, as he was preparing for a major pitch, an unexpected email appeared in his inbox. It was from a journalist working on a feature about self-made entrepreneurs with unique backgrounds. Daniel's breath caught. The name Nathaniel Hart was in the subject line. The journalist had made the connection. Daniel stared at the screen for a long time, his chest tightening at the idea of the past resurfacing. His mother's struggle, his father's silence, reduced to headlines. But then, slowly, he began to type. I have no connection to Nathaniel Hart. My story is my own. He hit send. And for the first time, he believed it completely. Success, he had once believed, would heal him. But even now, standing on solid ground, with recognition growing and a reputation of his own, he felt it. That quiet ache. That restlessness that whispered late at night. Because no amount of money, no spotlight could rewrite what had already been written in childhood. No success could erase the years his mother had struggled in silence. Or the boy he used to be, wondering why he wasn't enough. He had tried so hard to escape the gravity of Nathaniel Hart, and yet, some part of it still followed. That night, after a long meeting, Daniel found himself wandering through Central Park again. The same paths, the same chilled wind through amber leaves. He sat on a bench under a rustling tree, letting the hum of the city blur around him. He pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over one contact, Mom. He hadn't spoken to her in a few days. She never minded, never asked for daily calls, but still, the guilt always crept in when too much time passed. And tonight, he missed her voice. He needed a reminder of the part of him that had always been enough. Daniel had just begun typing out a message to his mother when his phone vibrated in his hand. An unknown number. He usually ignored those, but something, a flicker of instinct, made him answer. Hello? He said cautiously. There was a pause. Then a voice, low, weathered, unmistakable. Daniel. His breath caught. His grip tightened around the phone. It was him, Nathaniel Hart. Older now, rougher, but still, him. How did you get my number? Daniel asked, his voice sharper than he meant it to be. I have my ways, Nathaniel replied, his tone subdued. I figured it was time we talked. Daniel let out a short, bitter laugh. You figured that? Now, after 20 years, now is the right time? I know I don't deserve a warm welcome, Nathaniel said. I saw the article about your company. You've done well for yourself. Daniel's jaw tensed. I did it without you. I know. Another pause. I don't expect you to care, Nathaniel continued, but I'm not in the best shape, health-wise. Daniel froze. A storm of emotions rose up in him. Rage, resentment, confusion, and something else, something quieter. What do you want? He asked, keeping his tone cold. To see you, Nathaniel said, just once. One conversation. That's all I'm asking. Daniel hesitated. Every instinct screamed to hang up, to walk away, let the past stay buried. But the weight in his father's voice, it pulled at something inside him. Fine, Daniel said at last. One conversation, but I choose the place. Of course. They agreed to meet the next evening. Daniel barely slept. He tossed, turned, questioned everything. But by morning, one thing was clear. He had to face this, whatever it turned out to be. The restaurant was quiet, tucked away on a narrow Manhattan street. Just a few tables, dim lighting, the kind of place chosen for conversations no one wanted overheard. Daniel walked in, scanning the room. Then he saw him. Nathaniel Hart, seated alone in the far corner. He looked smaller somehow. His broad frame had thinned, his face lined not just with age, but with something else, something that might have been regret. Daniel approached slowly and sat across from him, keeping his expression unreadable. So talk. Nathaniel took a slow breath. I've made a lot of mistakes, he began. I won't make excuses for them, but leaving you and your mother was the worst one. Daniel scoffed. You don't get to say that now. You had decades to fix it. I know, Nathaniel nodded, and I don't expect forgiveness, but I do want to explain. He looked down at his hands, gathering whatever strength he had left. When your mother told me she was pregnant, I wasn't afraid of being a father. I was afraid of losing everything I had built. My image, my empire, my control. So I ran. I convinced myself I could outrun my failure. Daniel's voice trembled with quiet fury. You didn't just run. You abandoned us. My mother worked herself to the bone while you lived in luxury. You left us with nothing. Nathaniel's voice dropped. I know, and I've regretted it every day since. He exhaled slowly. I told myself I was doing you a favor, that staying away would give you a better shot at life. But the truth is, he looked up. I was a coward. Daniel stared at him, trying to read the man beneath the lines in wariness. This wasn't the arrogant executive from the glass tower. This was someone else. Someone breaking. Why now? Daniel asked. Why reach out after all this time? Nathaniel hesitated. Then, slowly, he pulled back the sleeve of his shirt, just enough to reveal a hospital bracelet. Stage 4. His voice was barely above a whisper. The doctors say I have months, maybe less. Daniel's pulse pounded as the words sank in. Less than a year, maybe only months. Nathaniel Hart, the man he had spent his whole life resenting, was dying. He had always imagined this moment differently. If it ever came, he thought he would feel vindicated, relieved even. But instead, he felt something break inside. The silence between them stretched. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Daniel asked, "What do you want from me?" Nathaniel met his eyes. "Not money, not pity," he said softly. "Just a chance to know my son before it's too late." Something cracked in Daniel's chest. Not enough to be called forgiveness, not yet, but enough to make him stay seated. Because walking away now wouldn't erase the past, and it wouldn't stop the pain either. That night, Daniel sat alone in his New York apartment, the city lights beyond the window painting reflections on the glass. He had always pictured this meeting with his father ending in triumph, him standing tall, successful, throwing his achievements in the man's face. But that fantasy had died the moment he saw Nathaniel again. There had been no arrogance left, no cold superiority. Only a sick man, trying to gather the pieces of a life built on running, and somehow that changed everything. In the days that followed, Daniel buried himself in work, meetings, reports, late nights at the office, anything to outrun the memory of that hospital room. But it stayed. His father, once a ghost in the background of his life, was suddenly very real. And very human. He hadn't told his mother yet. He wasn't sure how. She had lived through enough. But every time his phone buzzed and her name appeared, he felt it, the need to hear her voice. To remember the woman who never left, who never stopped choosing him. On the third night after their meeting, Daniel found himself driving without knowing where he was going. Until he realized. He did. The hospital stood quiet beneath the city's glow, its windows like watchful eyes. He hesitated at the elevator, at the hallway, at the door, and then finally he stepped inside. Nathaniel looked smaller than he remembered. The tubes and machines did little to hide the truth. His body was giving up. But when he saw Daniel, something sparked in his eyes. Surprise. Then hope. "I didn't think you'd come back," Nathaniel said, his voice raspier than before. Daniel lingered at the door. "I don't know why I did," he admitted. Nathaniel motioned to the chair beside the bed. After a pause, Daniel sat. The silence between them was thick, not awkward but full. Years of unsaid things pressing into the space. Finally, Daniel spoke. "Tell me everything. The truth. No more excuses." And for the first time in his life, Nathaniel Hart didn't deflect, didn't dodge. He simply told the truth. He spoke of his childhood, of growing up in a world where power meant protection and emotions were liabilities. He spoke of meeting Leora, how he'd loved her in the only way he knew how, recklessly, selfishly, how she had scared him because she saw through the mask, because she made him feel things that threatened the empire he had built. And when she told him she was pregnant, "I panicked," he admitted, voice cracking. "I told myself leaving was noble, that she was better off, that you were better off." He looked down. "But the truth is, I was just afraid of losing control, of being needed, of being known." Daniel sat frozen, listening to the unraveling of a man who had never let himself be honest, not even with himself. It wasn't forgiveness he felt, but it was something. Daniel sat in silence, the hospital room dim except for the soft glow of machines. Nathaniel's words still lingered in the air. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just didn't want to leave this world without you knowing how sorry I am." For years, Daniel had imagined this moment, the apology, the reckoning, the chance to finally hear the words that had haunted his childhood. But now that it was here, he realized something. It didn't undo the past. It didn't erase the long nights his mother had cried alone. It didn't give him back birthdays missed or hugs never offered. But it did something else. It softened the weight in his chest. It made room for something new. Not forgetting, but maybe peace. The following weeks passed in a quiet rhythm. Daniel found himself returning to the hospital more often than he expected. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they just sat. They talked about life, business, regrets, dreams neither of them had voiced before. There was still distance between them, years that could never be recovered. But slowly, something resembling connection began to grow in the silence between words. When Daniel finally told Leora, she was quiet for a long time. "I'm not sure I could ever do what you're doing," she admitted gently. Daniel nodded. "I don't know if I can either." But she didn't stop him. She had made her peace long ago. Now, it was his turn to find his own. One evening, Daniel sat by Nathaniel's bedside, watching the frail man breathe through labored sighs. The sharp lines of power were gone from his face, but there was something else there now: stillness. "Daniel," he whispered, eyes barely open. "I never got to be your father, but these past few weeks, you gave me something close." Daniel felt his throat tighten. He had never called him Dad, and he probably never would. But in that moment, he reached for Nathaniel's hand, held it. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was enough. Nathaniel Hart passed away 2 days later. Quietly, with Daniel sitting beside him. The will left everything to Daniel: the estate, the fortune, the properties. But more than that, it left him the pieces of a man he had never truly known. Journals, letters never sent, notes scrawled in margins, words Nathaniel had never found the courage to say aloud. At first, Daniel didn't know what to do with them, but in time, he began to read. Page by page, he began to understand not the tycoon, but the boy behind him. The boy who had been taught that love was weakness, that success mattered more than connection, and how that belief had cost him everything. Months later, Daniel stood at the window of his office, watching the city hum below. He had built a life here, one that wasn't defined by anyone's legacy, but his own. For years, he had chased success, not for joy, but to prove a point, to show he didn't need Nathaniel. But now, for the first time, he realized something. He wasn't running anymore. Not from the past, not from the hurt, not even from his father's memory. He was moving forward. Not in defiance, but in acceptance. Because the truest kind of freedom doesn't come from erasing the past, it comes from learning to live with it, and still choosing love anyway. To our esteemed audience, we extend our heartfelt appreciation for accompanying us on this emotional and deeply human journey. Your presence, attention, and empathy have meant more than words can fully express. This story was not merely a narrative of loss and reconciliation. It was a reflection on the resilience of the human spirit, the weight of choices, and the quiet power of forgiveness. It is our hope that through Daniel's journey, you found moments of recognition, perhaps even healing, within your own. Thank you for allowing this story to unfold before you, for your openness to its message, and for the time you gave to every word and every silence between. Should this story resonate with you, we humbly invite you to share it, so that its message may reach those who need it most. With deepest respect and gratitude.